Hi everyone, Dr. Jon Finn here. Welcome to another Tougher Minds podcast. You may be able to hear in the background, I am on my office treadmill, and I'm just walking along in the office as I'm recording this podcast. We're doing a lot of sessions for clients at the moment, titled things like Return to Work Anxiety, How to Build Resilience and Thrive. So I thought this is quite topical for people at the moment as we gear up to returning to some sort of normality. And there's a lot of stress and anxiety connected to that for a lot of people as we enter what is being termed the new normal. So I thought it would be helpful just to share a few of these insights that we're covering with clients and how we're helping people to start overcoming some of these challenges. I think what we need to recognise that we do live in the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, where the only constant is change. And this transition to a more flexible, hybrid, agile way of working is just part of that change. And because our brain's number one operating rule is to save energy. It's designed to save energy, so it always does what's easiest. And what's easiest for our brain is to just do what it always did, because it runs on habits. So anytime we're asked to make changes, and changes that don't give us immediate gratification, our brain doesn't like that. It causes it problems. So the VUCA world is invariably going to cause more stress and more anxiety, and that's why we're seeing these increases in mental health problems. And the VUCA world also makes it more difficult to get your brain working properly, because it makes it more difficult to build really good sleep, diet and exercise habits. But I think if we're going to understand how to overcome anxiety and stress, we first of all need to think about why it happens. And so, some people will say to me, well, I don't get stressed, John. But the way that I'm using the word stress here, it's the natural response that happens in everybody's brain. And you can think of stress levels on a continuum from 10 down to 1. 10 is the highest levels of stress you can experience. 1 is the lowest levels of stress you can experience. And depending on how many little stresses are in your life will depend on where you are on the continuum. But 1 stress occurs for very simple reasons, or we can explain it very simply. So an event happens, and let's say I'm on the train going into the office, and my expectation in that situation is that anyone else who's on the train in close proximity will stay at least 2 meters away from me. That's what I expect to happen. But if a person starts to get very close to me, and this is different to what I expected was going to happen, I get what we call a disconnection in meaning systems. And that's why stress happens. It's just a difference between what you expected to happen and what actually is happening. And of course, that's going on all the time now in big ways and small ways. So, in big ways, it's, well, we were going to return to the office on this date, and now it's been changed. That's a big example. In small ways, it might be, I expect my children to be able to do their schoolwork independently whilst they're in the holidays, or if they're having to be learning from home, so that I can get on with my work, and maybe that isn't the case, or I expect my partner to say something nice to me first thing in the morning, or not be angry about something, whatever it is. It's just these little disconnections or big disconnections. But that's what causes the stress. And whenever there is a disconnection, what happens in your brain, you can think of a 2-part process. First of all, you get the fight, flight or freeze response. So your brain gets ready to do something. Lots of chemicals, neurotransmitters get released. The thing that I point clients towards in this situation is, and the most important thing we can understand that happens in that stress response, is that we start to breathe faster. And for me, that's the most important thing, because it's the only thing that we have direct control over. By the way, I'm walking along at about 3 miles per hour now, starting to get slightly out of breath, walking and talking this quickly. but I'll keep going. I may have to reduce the speed soon. But anyway, so we start to breathe faster, and I'm breathing a bit faster now because I'm on the treadmill. And that's really important to understand because it's something we can control and manage and actually reduce. And I'll come back to that later. But essentially, stress happens because there's a disconnection. There's a disconnection in our meaning systems. The first part of the stress response is we start to breathe faster. The fight or flight response kicks in. The second part then of the stress response is that we start to get our attention, our thoughts, onto things that are not particularly helpful. We dwell, we beat ourselves up, or we get angry at the situation. Typically, we put our energies into things that are not particularly helpful for us. So that's how stress happens. And if we want to manage the stress response better, the first thing we need to get right are really solid foundations of good sleep, good diet, good exercise. And that's why the first thing we teach habit mechanics to do, once we've taught them how their brain works, is to build better habits around those areas. But the second thing, if those areas are working well, the second thing we can start to do to help us to manage the stress is to write it down. It's not just to keep thinking about it and rehearsing it in our brain, but actually to write it down, to say, well, what is it? And is it real? And where's the disconnection here? Because by doing that, you're actually starting to take more control of it, and you're taking the stress response out of the control of your alive perceived energy brain, your 8 brain, the term we use to explain the limbic regions of the brain. So we can start to write things down, and immediately that gives us more control. Now, the thing with stress is we can't necessarily avoid it happening to us, because often stresses happen because of uncontrollable things. What we can absolutely do is be more proactive in dealing with it. So a stress might last a week, or rather the negative experience or side effects of a stress might last a week, or maybe you can get it down to 6 days because you're proactive. Or a stress might last half an hour, or maybe you can be proactive so it only lasts 15 minutes. And this is what we're trying to do as habit mechanics. We're trying to use insights from neuroscience, behavioral science, to build better stress management habits. So the VUCA world means that stress and anxiety is just kind of part of our life, and it's going to continue to be. So we have to get better at managing them. It's going to be easier to manage stress if we understand why it happens. And that's why I gave that simple overview about the disconnection of what you expected to happen versus what is happening. And then there's a 2-part process that unfolds because of that. One is you start to breathe faster because of the fight or flight response, and then your brain starts to look for the threat, the problem, the worry. In order to make it easier to manage stress, we've got to build better sleep, diet, and exercise habits. And then once we start to notice that we feel that we're in a stress response state, we can start to write down what the problem is. If we want to build on that to some specific things that we can be doing, there are lots of things we could talk about here, but in this, what is a very short podcast, I'll give you 2 things to focus on. First one is to address the first part of the stress response, which is where you go into the fight or flight response and your breathing ultimately increases. So you get muscle tension, your 8 brain takes over everything, etc. Your activation level, a term that we use in our habit mechanic training, gets increased to unhelpful levels. And what we need to do here is ultimately reduce our breathing. So deliberately slow down our breathing. So for me, I'd focus on slowing down my breathing just to 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out. But I wouldn't just be practicing doing that when I notice I'm stressed. I'm lacing that practice of the 30-second breathing drill throughout the course of the day. So it could be whilst I'm boiling the kettle, it could be whilst I'm going for a walk, it could be at the end of the day as I'm writing down my end of day reflection. So we've got to counter that first part of the stress response. The second thing then is, how do we deal with the unhelpful thoughts? Well, we've already touched on it. We call this focus reflection. And there are many techniques we can use to learn how to do better focus reflection. Many of those we introduce in the stress management and confidence management modules of the level 2 habit mechanic course. But one of them we would call a WABA, which is a written 8-brain argument. And it just literally means, instead of dwelling and thinking and beating yourself up or getting angry in your head, write it down. Write down what you're thinking about. It takes seconds, minutes to do, and it puts you in control of the conversation that's going on in your head. So if we're going to get better at managing stress and anxiety, whether that's related to returning to work or in any other area of our life, we need to understand why it happens and have some specific tools, habit mechanic tools, that we can use to start building better habits in how we respond to it. We can't stop it happening, but we can get better at responding to it and ultimately get better at making stress and anxiety take up less of our time. Remember, there's only 24 hours in a day, and every day is a bit like a barcode. But instead of a black and white barcode, it's like a red and blue barcode. And what we're looking to do, and the red means times in the day where we're doing and thinking things that are not helpful for us being at our best, and the blue represents time in the day when we are doing and thinking things that help us to be at our best. And what we're trying to do as habit mechanics is squeeze out as many of those red lines as possible. That means building better habits. And if stress and anxiety you find yourself doing a lot of that and you find it's unhelpful for you, then you've got to build better stress management habits. If you want to learn to become a habit mechanic, the first thing you need to do is become a level 1 habit mechanic, and anyone can do that for free. All you need to do is go to our website, sign up for the course and take the course for free. Tell us when you're finished and we'll give you your certificate. Thank you so much for listening to this one, guys. I hope it's helpful. I know this is a real on-topic thing for people at the moment. Pleased to be able to share these insights. And just, thanks for listening, guys. If you like what you hear, do review the podcast. We really appreciate that. If you do have any questions about what we're saying, just get in touch. You can do that via the website very easily. There's a big green button in the bottom right-hand corner. It says contact us. Just ask us questions through there. These podcasts are going to keep coming. If there are any things that you'd like us to cover in them, just let us know and we'll do our best to do that. But until next time, stay safe and remember, you're only ever one small habit away from being your best and achieving your goals. Bye for now.